It's Miss Melissa with the Oosterhout Free Library, and our next book bite, Blizzard of the Blue Moon by Mary Pope Osborne, published by Scholastic. It features a unicorn, so it fits in with our summer reading theme of mythology and all kinds of creative creatures, and the theme is Imagine Your Story. And this book can be checked out from the library, no contact pickup. You can also get it for free on the Cloud Library app, which you can download from the Oosterhout website. In this magic treehouse, we see Teddy and Kathleen, who are two enchanters of Camelot, who are friends of Jack and Annie. And they also have a book of rhymes that they can use for certain magical powers that they got from Teddy and Kathleen. So that's referenced in this story too. And it opens with a little letter from the author. Dear reader, finally Jack and Annie go to New York City, the place I called home for 25 years. New York City is a larger-than-life place, filled with skyscrapers, taxis, subways, parks, museums, theaters, and bustling and busy streets. The city has all kinds of weather, too, from heat waves to raging snowstorms. I remember one particularly dramatic blizzard in 1996. The city came to a complete standstill as the wind howled and it snowed and snowed and snowed. When the storm finally ended, pale sunlight shone on all the white streets and sidewalks, and everyone went out to play. Kids made giant snowmen and dogs tunneled through the snowdrifts. No matter what disasters it suffers, New York City always comes back. I hope you have a great adventure there with Jack and Annie. We start with a little snippet of a poem by Anne Morrow Lindbergh, and we have some of her work here. He stays, the unicorn, in captivity, yet look again, his horn is free, rising above chain, fence, and tree. And that's from The Unicorn in Captivity. The Last Unicorn. The November sky was gray with clouds. Jack sat reading in front of the living room fire. Who wants hot chocolate? His dad called from the kitchen. Me, please, said Jack. The front door burst open, and with a gust of cold wind, Annie rushed inside. Jack, guess what? She whispered. It's back. How do you know? Said Jack. I was walking home from the library. Annie paused to catch her breath. And I saw a flash in the sky above the woods. The last time that happened, before she could finish the sentence, Jack jumped up. Dad, Annie and I are going outside for a while, he shouted. Can the hot chocolate wait till we get back? Sure, have fun, their dad called from the kitchen. I have to get my pack, Jack said to Annie. I'll meet you on the porch. Don't forget the rhyme book, said Annie. Annie slipped outside, and Jack ran up to his room. He grabbed his backpack. He checked to make sure their book of magic rhymes was inside. Good, there it was. Jack charged back downstairs. He pulled on his boots, put on his jacket, tied a scarf around his neck, grabbed his mittens, and headed out the door. Come on, said Annie. Jack could see his breath in the cold air. He said, let's hurry. Jack and Annie ran down the street and into the Frog Creek woods. They wove between the trees, their boots crunching through the fallen leaves. Jack stopped. The magic treehouse was back. High in the tall oak tree, it was silhouetted against the gray November sky. You're right, he said to Annie. Good work. Thanks, Annie said. She ran to the rope ladder and started up. Jack followed her. When they climbed inside the treehouse, Jack and Annie saw a book and a scroll of parchment paper lying on the floor. Annie picked up the scroll, unrolled it, and read out loud. Dear Jack and Annie of Frog Creek, I am sending you on one more mission to prove that you can use magic wisely. This poem will guide you. And it was from Merlin and Morgan. The very last unicorn is now hidden well by those who have put him under a spell. 4 centuries, 4 decades from that afternoon, at the end of November, before the blue moon. He will wake once more and be free to go home, if you call out his name, divine flower of Rome. You must coax him to stand once his name is spoken. his chain will break, and the spell too be broken. Then a young girl must love him and show her the way, lest he be trapped forever on public display. If he loses this chance to rise and depart, the magic will fade from his horn and heart. A unicorn, breathed Annie. I love him already. I'll show him the way. But this poem is really hard to understand, said Jack. What kind of research book did Morgan send us? He picked up the book that had been left for them by Morgan Le Fay, the librarian of Camelot. The cover showed a row of skyscrapers. The title was New York City Guidebook, 1938. New York City? Said Annie. I love New York City. Remember the great time we had there with Aunt Mallory? Yeah, I love it too, said Jack. But why would there be a unicorn in New York City in 1938? A unicorn's an ancient fantasy creature. New York City's a real place, and 1938 isn't even that long ago. You're right, said Annie. It sounds like a hard mission. But don't forget, we have Teddy and Kathleen's magic rhymes to help us. Yeah, said Jack. He pulled out the book given to them by their friends Teddy and Kathleen, two young enchanters of Camelot. The problem is we can only use each rhyme once. We've already used 7 out of the 10. Which means we still have 3 left, said Annie. What are they? Pull a cloud from the sky, said Jack. Cool, said Annie. Yeah, it is, said Jack, but I'm not sure it will be much use. He looked back at the book. Find a treasure you must never lose, he said. Hey, that's a really good one, said Annie. The unicorn's a treasure, so that rhyme could take care of our whole mission. But it only partly fits, said Jack. You could call the unicorn a treasure, but once we find him, we have to lose him. He has to go back home. Oh, right, said Annie. What else? Your favorite, said Jack. Turn into ducks. Annie laughed. I can't wait to use that one, she said. I hope we never use that one, said Jack. He didn't want to waddle around and quack like a duck. These leftover rhymes don't seem very helpful to me. Well, let's just wait and see, said Annie. But now, she held up Morgan's research book and smiled. Jack nodded. New York City, here we come. He pointed at the book's cover. I wish we could go there. The wind started to blow. The treehouse started to spin. It spun faster and faster, and then everything was still. Absolutely still. Chapter 2. Who are they? Snow blew into the treehouse. Jack and Annie wore wool coats, hats, and mittens. Jack's canvas backpack had turned into a leather briefcase with buckles and a shoulder strap. Jack and Annie looked out the window. Below the treehouse was a wide, snow-covered field that ended in a wall of evergreen trees. Beyond the trees was the city skyline. This is definitely New York, said Annie. See the Empire State Building? Remember our visit to the top? She pointed to a faraway building that rose above the others. This must be Central Park. I remember that big field. Yeah, I do too, said Jack, but we've landed in New York in 1938. It's different back then. He opened the research book and read from the introduction. The city of New York is the largest city in the Western Hemisphere. It covers an area of 322 square miles. Jack closed the book. Whoa. Even in 1938, New York was a huge city, he said. This is going to be like looking for a needle in a haystack. Let's read our mission poem again, said Annie. She read the first verse out loud. The very last unicorn is now hidden well by those who have put him under a spell. Okay, so this unicorn was put under a spell, said Jack, and he must be hidden somewhere in New York, or Merlin wouldn't have sent us here. Right, said Annie. She read the next verse. 4 centuries, 4 decades from that afternoon, at the end of November, before the blue moon. What's a blue moon? Asked Annie, looking up. I've heard that expression before. It's when you have 2 full moons in the same month, said Jack. It doesn't happen very often. Oh, said Annie. She read on. He will wake once more and be free to go home, if you call out his name, divine flower of Rome. Wait, Does that mean the unicorn's name is Divine Flower of Rome? Asked Jack. I guess, said Annie. She read on. You must coax him to stand once his name is spoken. His chain will break, and the spell too be broken. Then a young girl must love him, and show him the way, lest he be trapped forever on public display. If he loses his chance to rise and depart, all magic will fade from his horn and his heart. So I'm the young girl, said Annie, and I have to help him get home, or his magic will fade away forever? Right, said Jack. Okay, so let's review. There's a unicorn on public display somewhere in New York City. He's under a spell. The spell runs out in late November before a blue moon. But he'll only wake up when someone calls his name, which is Divine Flower of Rome. Then a young girl, you, must love him and show him the way home. Great, said Annie. Let's get started. Get started? How? Said Jack. Maybe we should talk to some New Yorkers, said Annie. We can ask them if they know anything about a unicorn in New York City. She looked out the window. There's some people in the park right now. Jack looked out. Through the falling snow, he saw girls crossing the fields carrying skates. He saw two people standing on top of a small hill. One wore a cape and the other a long raincoat. If we start asking people about unicorns, they'll think we're crazy, said Jack. Who cares? Said Annie. Maybe someone will at least know something that can help us. Let's go down. She started down the ladder. Jack quickly packed up their books. He buckled his bag and followed her. When they stepped onto the ground, Jack and Annie looked around. The skaters were gone. The two people on the hill were too. Where'd everybody go? Said Jack. I don't know, but we'll find someone else. Come on, said Annie. Jack and Annie started across the wide field. The snow was falling fast and furiously. The wind blew harder. Look, a frozen pond, said Annie, pointing. That must be where the skaters are coming from. Wet snow stuck to Jack's glasses. He wiped them off so he could see. No one was skating on the pond now. Whirlwinds of powdery snow swirled over the ice. Keep going, said Jack. They kept trudging through the snow. Hey, look, remember that? Said Annie. What? Said Jack. He wiped the snow off his glasses again. He saw a merry-go-round. Oh, yeah. On their trip to New York with their Aunt Mallory, they'd taken a ride on it. But now the riderless painted horses looked lonely and sad. I feel like we're the last living creatures in Central Park, said Jack. Which way do we go now? Asked Annie. Which way did we come from? It was hard to see anything with the white haze of the falling snow. The buildings bordering the park and the skyscrapers in the distance had disappeared. Let's see what our book says, said Jack. He unbuckled his leather briefcase and pulled out the research book. He found a picture of Central Park and read, Central Park is a vast natural area in the middle of New York City. The park has 32 miles of winding footpaths and covers 840 acres of land. It has rock formations, woods, and many bodies of water. It also has... Okay, I got it, said Annie. It's a big park. Is there a map that shows where we are? Jack tried to read from the index, but the wind and snow made it impossible. He stuffed the book back into his briefcase. Forget it, he said. Let's just try to get out of the park. Jack and Annie turned away from the lonely merry-go-round and walked across the snow. A gust of wind blew Jack's cap off. As he turned around to grab it, he saw a couple walking a short distance behind them. The two people looked like teenagers. They were walking with their heads bowed against the wind. The girl wore a dark cape with a hood. The boy wore a hat and a tan raincoat with a belt. Hey, look, Jack said to Annie. But at that moment, the wind shook the trees, and big clumps of snow fell from the branches. Jack and Annie ducked and covered their heads. When the wind died down, Jack looked around for the couple. They're gone now, he said. Who's gone? Said Annie. Who did you see? Two teenagers, I think, said Jack. A boy and a girl. We saw them earlier from the treehouse. I think they might be following us. Wait a second, said Annie. Two teenagers? A boy and a girl? Following us? Who does that remind you of? A big smile crossed Jack's face. Teddy and Kathleen? He said. Think about it, said Annie. On our last 3 missions, it seemed like Teddy and Kathleen were always nearby, wearing disguises, ready to help us when we needed it. Right, said Jack. We could sure use their help now. He turned around. Hello, he shouted. Hello, Annie yelled. But the wind answered them with a howl. More clumps of snow blew down on Jack and Annie. Let's get going, said Annie. They'll find us sooner or later. They always do. Chapter 3. Lost in Central Park. Jack and Annie kept walking until they came to the ice pond again. We've been here before, said Jack. We're going in circles. How do we get out of the park? We have to try to walk in a straight line, said Annie. Jack and Annie struggled on. Jack kept looking back, trying to catch sight of Teddy and Kathleen again. But it was getting harder and harder to see anything. Wet snow kept sticking to his glasses. Snow had blown up the sleeves of his jacket, under his neck scarf, and into his mittens. Yikes, said Annie. She grabbed Jack's arm. Look! A huge wolf-like dog stood on a ledge above them, his mouth open. Whoa, said Jack. The dog didn't move. It was perfectly still. Annie laughed. Oh, he's a statue, she said. She ran to a plaque under the dog statue, brushed off the snow, and shouted to Jack. His name is Balto. In 1925, he carried medicine 600 miles through a blizzard in Alaska. And look over my shoulder, we have a book here about Balto. That's really great, said Jack, but how do we get out of the park? Well, if we follow this path, it's bound to lead somewhere, said Annie. Jack followed Annie up a wide path. They walked and walked, passing a snow-covered outdoor stage and a fountain with the statue of an angel. Raising her outspread wings, the angel seemed to fly away. Which way now? Said Jack. 2 paths led away from the angel fountain, one to the left and one to the right. I don't know, said Annie. Pick one. Jack headed to the left. Annie followed. They passed a frozen lake and walked over an arched bridge. Jack kept his eyes on the ground and walked and walked and walked. Every time he lifted his head, the snow felt like needles against his skin. Jack tried to keep walking in a straight line, but the path they were following began twisting and turning like a maze. Different paths branched off, curving this way and that. Jack remembered information from his research book. The park has 32 miles of winding footpaths. We have to get off these paths, he shouted to Annie, or we'll be lost in Central Park forever. Annie didn't answer. Annie! Jack shielded his face from the cutting wind and looked back. He didn't see her. Jack turned around and around looking for Annie, but he couldn't see anything. The world was completely white. Annie! He cried. Had she gone off in another path? Was she lost? Annie! She could wander around in the storm for hours, thought Jack. She could freeze to death. I have to find her. Jack tried to stay calm. He took a few breaths. A rhyme, he thought. He couldn't remember which magic rhymes were left. He struggled to unbuckle his briefcase. His fingers felt frozen. He pulled out the book and hunched over it, trying to shelter it from the storm. He wiped his glasses off and read, Turn into ducks. That wouldn't help. Pull a cloud from the sky. That would only make things worse. Find a treasure you must never lose. Is Annie a treasure? Jack wondered. He'd always thought of a treasure as something super valuable, like gold or silver or rare jewels. But right now, Annie seemed more valuable than any of those things. She seemed like the most valuable thing in the world. Jack found the rhyme and shouted, Treasure forever must never be lost, umata cal, umata bost. Jack! Jack whirled around. Annie was standing right behind him. There you are, she said. I was afraid you got lost. I wasn't lost, said Jack. You were lost. He slipped the rhyme book into his briefcase. Not me, you, said Annie. Whatever, said Jack. Just stay near me now. He took her hand and gripped it tightly. Okay, let's figure out what to do. Wait, is that a castle over there? Said Annie. A what? Said Jack. A castle, look. Peering through the storm, Jack saw a small castle sitting on top of a snowy hill. A light burned in a window. "A castle in Central Park?" Jack said. "That's weird." "Let's go see if anyone's inside," said Annie. "Maybe they can help us. People in a castle might know about unicorns, or at least know how to get out of the park," said Jack. Here's a picture. Jack and Annie struggled up the stone steps that led to the castle. At the top of the steps, Jack glanced back to the park. He could barely make out two figures in the snow, one in a dark cape and one in a raincoat. "Them! It's them!" said Jack. A cloud of wind-driven snow blew over the couple. Jack kept looking, eager for another glimpse of the two young enchanters, but the snow hid everything from sight. "They'll find us," said Annie. "Come on." She pushed open the door to the castle and led the way inside. The door slammed shut behind them. Jack and Annie stood in a dimly lit hallway. "Hello! Who's there?" a man called. "Jack and Annie!" shouted Annie. A tall, thin man came down a curving stone stairway. He wore an old-fashioned blue striped suit. "Goodness! 2 children?" he said. "What are you doing here on a day like this?" "We got lost in the park," said Jack. My name's Jack, and this is my sister, Annie." "Pleased to meet you. I'm Bill Perkins," said the man. "Welcome to Belvedere Castle." "What is this place?" asked Annie. "The castle was built in 1869, said Mr. Perkins. "It was meant to be a delightful surprise when one wandered through the park. Today it's a delightful surprise with a nature observatory and weather instruments inside." "Weather instruments?" said Jack. "Yes, I've come from the U.S. Weather Bureau to check them," said Mr. Perkins. "I'm afraid right now our data is telling us that the weather's undergoing a rapid and terrible change." Jack shivered in his damp clothes. "Our data is telling us the same thing," he said. "A storm has blown in from the Midwest, bringing wind and snow," said Mr. Perkins. "But after nightfall things will get worse. Another storm is coming up from the south, gathering speed on its way." "That sounds serious," said Annie. "It's worse than serious," Mr. Perkins said. "It's disastrous. After dark the two systems will meet and create a monster blizzard. It would be the worst in New York history, even worse than the blizzard of '88. Jack caught his breath. "Poor New York," said Annie. "Ah, yes. It's the last thing our great city needs during these hard times," said Mr. Perkins, shaking his head. "It does sound like hard times in New York City." Next time on Book Bites from the Oosterhout Free Library, we'll find out what happens when the storm gets worse.